Hello
with Eli.
guys.
Eli told him that he was very proud of him and that he could not have been prouder even if he was his own son. He also mentioned to Gordon that he knew of who had told Alex about unforeseen consequences and they would have a conversation about this mysterious entity in the future. Following this heartwarming moment, Gordon and Eli joined Alex and Dog as the rocket hit the super portal, where it successfully stopped its formation and cut off the Combine's attempts to reconnect to their overworld. This was a great victory for the Resistance, but there was still work to do. Prepared to head off straight away to find Judith and the Borealis, they entered the hangar of an old helicopter Alex had fixed up that she and Gordon planned to use to travel, and Eli joined them. Just outside of the hangar, two Combine advisors waited for an opportunity to strike back as these key members of the Resistance, and as the trio traveled into the lower parts of the hangar, the advisors broke through the window in a last-ditch attempt to stop them. Here, they used their telekinetic abilities and
Hmm.
pinned Alex and Gordon to a wall as Eli attempted to fight them off with a metal pipe. But the advisors were too powerful for him, where one lifted him up. In this moment, Eli told Alex that he loved her as the advisor impaled the back of his head. He died upon impact. As the advisors prepared to take Alex next, Dog crashed through the ceiling and fought off these creatures, but the damage had already been done. Eli was dead, and as Gordon fell to the floor, he watched as Alex cried over her father's body. This is where Breen Grub and Epistle 3 take place, if you consider them canon. I have pinned the videos above and linked them in the description. The G-Man was disappointed with Gordon as a recruit, and as he watched from a distance, he had an idea on how he could hire Alex instead. He had a way to motivate her to accept his terms. He just needed to challenge her first. Using his abilities, the G-Man traveled back 5 years to where Alex was a young, impressionable 19-year-old. The Combine knew of the G-Man and his abilities, so when he appeared inside of an apartment complex in view of them, in this rare occasion, they brought him one of their most advanced pieces of technology, the Vault, to capture him. Here, he and the apartment building were trapped inside. This moment began the adjustment of the timeline. With this victory, the Combine kept the Vault in a place above the quarantine zone of City 17 and reported the use of the Vault on their internal network. On a raid of a Combine region, Eli Vance and another Resistance member, Russell, looked for equipment, supplies, and information to help them with their cause. During this raid, Russell accessed a Combine system and discovered information on something called the Vault, but the information here was very limited on what this actually was. However, the access of this file alerted the Combine of their location, where, subsequently, Combine units were sent to capture them. This was the moment the G-Man had planned for. Eli was later captured by Combine units, and Alex did what she could to rescue him, but ended up getting arrested herself. Luckily, Russell was able to break her out of Combine custody, where the two worked together to free Eli. Through her journey of the quarantine zone, a Xenian-infested area of City 17, Alex used the Russells, also known as gravity gloves, and the weapon she came across to reach her
Uh-uh.
father. Alex also met a Vortigaunt, Gary, who had suffered brain damage and somehow had a link to a big, future event in Alex's life, Eli's death. But Alex thought nothing of this just yet, and eventually she derailed a razor train and rescued her father. Free from Combine capture, Eli and Russell looked further into the plans that they had stolen from the Combine system on the vault, where they theorized that it could be some sort of superweapon. Here, Eli sent Alex to investigate further as the words of Gary rang in her head: "Follow the Northern Star." As she evaded Combine forces, Alex looked out of a window and saw the vault for the first time. A giant floating ship in the middle of the quarantine zone, connected to several wires across the city. Alex later discovered a substation of the vault connected to an abandoned hotel. This hotel also happened to be called the Northern Star. So, following Gary's words, she entered the hotel, fought through the Xenian infestation within, and reached the substation. Here, she made a disturbing discovery, that this station was powered by a Vortigaunt trapped inside of it, where their natural vortessence energy was absorbed and sent to the vault. On her path, Alex discovered more substations and rescued the Vortigaunt trapped within them. As she reached a zoo infested by antlions, Eli contacted Alex with more information about the vault. He and Russell believed it was not actually a superweapon, but a prison, and whatever the Combine had trapped in there was very dangerous to their cause. As she continued on, Alex overheard a conversation between a Combine scientist and an advisor where they discussed who was in the vault. Someone who had survived the Black Mesa incident and disappeared shortly after. Instantly, Eli and Russell believed this to be Gordon Freeman, the hero of Black Mesa. If they could rescue him, then this would be a huge win for the Resistance. So, Alex ventured on to attempt to do this. Eventually, all of the Vortigaunts in the substations were freed, which left the vault without power. However, a backup generator kicked in and kept the prison in the sky. In response to this, Alex made her way to the vault's dock and attempted to bring it in manually, but instead, the vault crashed into the ground. As Alex entered the vault, she fought her way to the core and discovered a man frozen in time, held by the Vortigaunt energy the Combine had stolen from its prisoners. Still under the impression that this was Gordon Freeman, Alex used her gravity gloves to manipulate the vortessence energy around her and shattered his cage. Here, the G-Man was free, and he was finally face to face with his potential new hire. She had passed his test, and he had an offer she could not refuse. The G-Man offered Alex a nudge as a reward for his freedom, in which she responded that she wanted the Combine to be removed from Earth, but that was too much of a nudge. He then played his hand and offered her something she did not yet know she wanted, and here he showed her the death of her father. The G-Man let her know she could change this, and as she looked at her hands, they filled with Vortigaunt energy, where she struck out and sent a wave of energy through space and time at the Combine advisor just before it killed her father. She had acted exactly how the G-Man believed she would, and had passed his test, just like Gordon and Adrian had back at Black Mesa. Here, he told Alex that he had another employee, but he was unwilling or unable to perform how he had expected, where the G-Man showed Gordon, who had disappointed him as a result of the Vortigaunt's interference and his actions. With Alex in his grasp, he took her from the moment just after her father had survived and placed her in stasis as a new recruit. With his plan successful, he returned back to the present day and watched the aftermath of his actions, where Eli instantly knew that the G-Man had had a hand in his daughter's sudden disappearance. So, Eli Vance handed a crowbar to Gordon Freeman, where he said that they had work to do. After this point, the fate of Gordon, Eli, Dog, Isaac, Arnie, Judith, Lamar, the Gnome, the rest of the Resistance, the Combine, the G-Man and his employers is unknown. Many years in the future, some believe this to have been 50 years, while others believe it was closer to 50,000, deep underground in Upper Michigan, the Aperture Science Facility continued to function. The Combine still had not been able to access this facility, even in GLaDOS' absence, and as so, everything inside had continued to operate. Aperture planned ahead for the future and had installed an emergency test protocol that oversaw test chambers in a time of cataclysmic system failure, where the autonomous robots were able to function on a mere 1.1 volts. As time had passed, nature had reclaimed parts of the facility, and the enrichment center decayed without maintenance from Aperture personnel. However, some of these robots were sentient and sought to find out what planet Earth was like outside of the walls of Aperture, where a personality called Wheatley decided to enlist the help of the humans in the long-term relaxation vault. And here, he found one that was still alive, Chell. As she woke up, Chell was confused on how she had ended up here. The last thing she remembered was her fight with GLaDOS, and then a bright light. However, after Wheatley explained that some time had passed, and he knew of an escape route out of Aperture, Chell followed him. To escape the facility, Wheatley led Chell to the central AI chamber, where GLaDOS had once controlled and dominated Aperture. Here, they discovered her remains. It is unknown how her robotic body ended up back in Aperture, or how its design changed, but some theorize that the autonomous robots of the facility built her a new body in preparation to install her with a backup version. But no one came to do this, so her body, just like the rest of Aperture, was claimed by nature. Wheatley explained that all they needed to do was access the main breaker room to call an elevator to the surface, and they had to make sure that they did not accidentally activate GLaDOS in the process. As they entered the breaker room, Wheatley somehow managed to activate every switch, and as a result, he reactivated GLaDOS too. Since her death, GLaDOS' consciousness had replayed the last 2 minutes before her destruction on loop, constantly over all of these years as a result of a quick-save feature in her system. And the first thing she saw upon reactivation was Chell, the person that had murdered her. As a result of this, GLaDOS placed Chell back into a testing track and crushed Wheatley's core. Back in the same situation she had been in many years before, Chell worked through Aperture's test chambers as GLaDOS repaired the Aperture facility. Alongside this, GLaDOS also began development on 2 testing robots, Atlas and Peabody, where she planned to murder Chell when they were complete. However, Chell's incarceration did not last long, as Wheatley managed to salvage parts from spare cores in the facility to repair himself, and then he broke Chell out of the testing track. Within the maintenance areas, GLaDOS attempted to get back her rogue test subject, but Wheatley knew the maintenance areas extremely well, as he had worked here, and he had a plan to take down GLaDOS. First, he knew of GLaDOS' main forms of attack, turrets and neurotoxin. So, he led Chell to the turret manufacturing plant and instructed her to manipulate the production line. On this line, the completed turrets were scanned against a template to see if they were fit for use or defective. So, Chell adjusted this template and set the parameters to allow only the defective turrets to continue onto distribution, as the perfect working turret was sent to an incinerator. With GLaDOS' new turrets now unusable, Weasley led Chell to the neurotoxin chamber, where Chell used lasers to disable the robot's access to the substance. And here, with GLaDOS' defenses out of use, Chell returned to her central AI chamber. After a brief confrontation, GLaDOS realized what Chell and Wheatley had done, and are now defenseless against them. Chell initiated the core transfer process of the facility, where they swapped out GLaDOS' core with Wheatley's. This meant that Wheatley was now in charge of Aperture, where he called for an elevator so that he and Chell could leave. But this newfound power appeared to have a negative effect on him, and instead, he got mad and placed GLaDOS' core into a potato battery. In a growing rage, he accused Chell of bossing him around and working with GLaDOS, while Potato Battery GLaDOS realized that Weasley was the core that had been attached to her and given her a constant stream of stupid thoughts. As he got angrier, he smashed at the elevator with a robotic arm, where it plummeted deep into the forgotten parts of Aperture. As Chell woke up, she saw a bird fly away with the Potato Battery GLaDOS, potatoes, and with her portal gun, Chell ventured into the enrichment spheres of Aperture to find her, where, upon discovery, she formed a more positive relationship as they attempted to climb up towards the surface. On this journey, the pre-recorded messages Cave had made were played out into the spheres, where Carolyn even made an appearance in which GLaDOS recognized the voice as her own, a sort of conscience, and as time passed, GLaDOS appeared to unlock some semblance of the person she had once been before she was uploaded to a machine, and this appeared to soften her harsh personality. Eventually, Chell and GLaDOS arrived back at the Enrichment Center. At this point, they discovered Weasley had an urge to test. This impulse was a side effect of being connected to the central AI system. If a test subject completed a chamber, then the robot was rewarded with a good feeling. But if they went too long without a test being completed, then they would get an itch to test. Weasley had attempted to get around this with a new creation, the Franken-turret, but they were unable to complete a test chamber. So, when Chell arrived back at the Enrichment Center, he put her back into a testing track. Since Wheatley had taken over the facility, he had neglected to care for it, where its nuclear reactor began to melt down. As he did not know what the issue was or how to fix it, he just turned off the alarms and hoped the problem would go away. In this new era of Aperture, Weasley renamed the facility to Weasley Laboratories, and as Chell tested for him, he sought out other options to fulfill his testing needs. He knew how problematic Chell was, and then he discovered Atlas and Peabody. With robots ready to take her place, Weasley attempted to kill Chell, but as another person in this universe that had the extraordinary ability to survive impossible situations, she escaped and instead made her way to his lair. On her way there, Weasley watched back the battle between Chell and GLaDOS, where he adjusted his lair to make it Chell-proof. However, Chell had a secret weapon, GLaDOS, where she suggested they attach corrupted cores to Weasley's body to trigger a core transfer. As Weasley gloated and threw bombs at Chell, she used these to break open a pipe of conversion gel, which, upon touching the floor tiles and walls, made these surfaces portalable. Here, GLaDOS brought in the corrupted cores as Chell placed them on Weasley. After Chell managed to connect cores to Weasley, the system detected that he was corrupted, and a core transfer was triggered. Surprisingly, Weasley had planned for this event and placed bombs around the button Chell needed to press to initiate the core transfer, and as she attempted to hit the switch, the bombs exploded and knocked her back. Dazed and confused, Chell looked around and saw just how close the Aperture Science Facility was to meltdown as a result of Weasley's neglect, and above she saw the sky. Here, Chell fired a portal at the moon, which connected to her other portal beneath Weasley. Instantly, Weasley and Chell were pulled through the portal to the moon, and in this chaotic moment, GLaDOS was able to reattach herself to the central AI chamber and pull Chell back as Weasley drifted off into space. With full control of her facility once again, and with 2 robots to test for her, GLaDOS allowed Chell to leave. It appeared that GLaDOS, in a way, cared about Chell as a result of Caroline's influence. So, as Chell rode the elevator up, GLaDOS discovered the location of Caroline in her files and claimed to delete her. Whether she did or not is unknown, but she explained that Caroline was her newfound conscience, and she did not want it. As Chell rode the elevator up to the surface, she was greeted by a turret orchestra, a grand send-off for her time in Aperture, and eventually the elevator stopped and Chell stepped out into an endless field of grain. And behind her, a partially burned companion cube was thrown out. This was the cube Chell had been asked to incinerate way back in Test Chamber 17, but it appeared that GLaDOS had kept hold of it. Chell was finally free. The problem was that she had no idea what had happened to her planet in her absence as she ventured into the unknown with her companion cube. An untold number of years had passed during her long sleep in the extended relaxation vault, and it is unknown if the Resistance succeeded against the Combine, or if they still occupy the planet in some way. Regardless, the fate of Chell and her story is unknown after this point. Underground, GLaDOS was free of Chell, and she now had her own robots to test for her. As Atlas and Peabody completed her newly constructed test chambers, she missed the fear that the human test subjects displayed. These robots could simply be put back together upon their demise in comparison to the humans who would stay dead, and aware that some areas of Aperture were still out of her control. GLaDOS used her robots to acquire discs to access them in the hopes she could discover new human test subjects. After the retrieval and installation of these discs, GLaDOS discovered the human vault, the vault that the scientist had taken refuge inside during her assault on the facility. Here, she sent Atlas and Peabody to access it. Upon their arrival at the vault, these robots interacted with one another in what the scanner perceived to be human, and the door unlocked, where GLaDOS and the robots discovered thousands of human test subjects in stasis. With these, GLaDOS no longer needed Atlas and Peabody, so she set them to self-destruct, and this time did not rebuild them. Over the next week, GLaDOS subjected her new human test subjects to her chambers. However, within just 1 week, she attempted to turn them into killing machines, but they all perished in her tests. Although GLaDOS preferred human test subjects due to their ability to display true fear and their limited mortality, when they did die, they were gone forever. And subsequently, as the final human test subject died, GLaDOS resorted back to Atlas and Peabody. In their reconfiguration chamber, Atlas and Peabody re-entered the testing hub. Here, GLaDOS told them that they had been out of commission for 100,000 years, and the humans were still all fine, but she later confessed that the humans had only lasted a mere week. For GLaDOS to lie to her robots, it would suggest that she felt a sense of guilt that she had lied, and for her failure to keep them alive. This further suggested that Carolyn may still have lingered somewhere in GLaDOS' memory banks. As she set her robot to test, GLaDOS detected something override her control of Aperture. To figure out what this was, she sent Atlas and Peabody to investigate. On their way, they used the skills they had learned throughout the test chambers and arrived at a control room outside of the standard testing region. As they entered, they discovered a bird's nest set up within an old chassis of GLaDOS. The bird had created a home here and laid eggs, having formed a phobia of birds after she had been kidnapped by one. GLaDOS asked Atlas and Peabody to escape before it attacked them, but Atlas was brave and opened a hatch for it to fly away. And here, GLaDOS regained full control of her facility. Although the bird had fled, it had left eggs in the nest, in which GLaDOS took them for herself, with the plan to raise them as her own little killing machines. This is the last known moment in this long, complicated timeline. But in other universes, events occurred differently. The multiverse is an infinitely big place, and in other versions of Earth, Aperture acted differently. In one, Cave Johnson successfully transferred his consciousness into a machine, but due to complications, his fate left him trapped as a giant head without help. In another, Cave Johnson managed to trick the other Aperture Science facilities across the multiverse into building test chambers for him, where he was able to save enough money to keep his Aperture functioning the way he wanted. And in one more of an infinite number of possibilities, Cave Johnson became rich enough to purchase Black Mesa, and as the owner, he renamed the facility to Blaperture Mesa, and put a stop to the study of anomalous materials, completely aware of the possibility of a resonance cascade. In this universe, the people of Earth lived on, unaware of the existence of the Combine or their brutal reign. In the multiverse, anything is possible, too many to mention, but in our timeline, the population only suffered due to the decisions of a few. Here, our timeline ends, and now all we can do is wait for it to continue. I knew this video would be long, but I did not anticipate it would be this long. I guess covering more than 11 pieces. Clues to the Vortigaunt hold. How were they connected to the mural in the quarantine zone? And how do these images impact the greater story of the Half-Life timeline? Here we explore in the lore and story behind the mural in Half-Life Alyx. The resonance cascade in the Black Mesa research facility had a devastating aftermath for the entirety of humanity and Vortigaunt kind. This almost apocalyptic level event ripped a hole in space between planet Earth and the border world of Xen. However, it also alerted the multi-universal alien empire, the Combine, of humanity's existence. The Vortigaunt had met the Combine mineral healing abilities and many more. The Combine knew how useful this connection to the Vortessence could be for their armies, and so they captured as many Vortigaunt as they could to understand and harvest Vortigaunt energy from them. On one of their hunts, Combine units captured a Vortigaunt that would later go on to be called Gary. Just like many of his kind, Gary was subjected to their twisted experiments, branded, biologically modified, and generally mutilated. In one of these procedures to understand the Vortigaunt connection to the Vortessence, the Combine drilled a hole in Gary's head and, as a result, cut off part of his connection to it. The Vortigaunt used the Vortessence to communicate with each other. No matter where they were, they could talk to each other. But after this injury, Gary was left alone, disconnected from the rest of his species. Through more torturous procedures, Gary finally managed to effectively fight back against his captors, and eventually, he escaped and continued to fight his way to freedom. Out in City 17, Gary came across the Quarantine Zone, a region of the city that had been sealed off by the Combine as they attempted to keep the Xenian infestation at bay. Gary had lived on Xen for a period of time and was not fazed by the headcrabs, barnacles, and various other wildlife that come here, so he made it his home. He captured headcrabs for his meals and created a safe environment to live in. The brutal experiments he had been put through by the Combine had left him brain damaged. He was completely alone for the first time without the voice of his kin in his head. However, he also learned that this injury had adapted his connection to the Vortessence in a good way. He saw events that had happened and would happen in the future, but he also noticed that someone or something had altered the timeline of events to come. With all of this information, Gary used his connection to this almighty powerful force to tell the stories of what he knew and what his visions had shown him were to come. The Vortigaunts were storytellers. Gary knew a savior would come one day, but he did not know when. 15 years after the initial Combine invasion, Alex Bunn started her journey to rescue her father from the Combine, and on her path, she entered the Quarantine Zone. As she wandered through, Alex discovered bursts of green energy that manipulated the objects around her, as if it wanted to guide her in a specific direction. To this, amazed, Alex followed the Vortessence energy and turned a corner to discover a large mural that spanned across 3 walls, hidden in the sewers, away from the eyes of Combine patrols that occasionally surveyed the dangerous area. The mural begins with imagery of the Vortigaunt species on their homeworld. They were a peaceful species and lived out their days with each other as they farmed the native antlion resources, the most valuable of which was antlion extract. For the most part, the Vortigaunt controlled this species